They called it the Council of Dawn, a name meant to inspire peace. But for humanity, it marked the beginning of darkness. In the year 2564, humanity stood before the Galactic Council, accused of crimes no species could ever truly prove: arrogance, aggression, and the sin of expansion. They said humans had gone too far, too fast. That we had spread across the stars without permission. That our wars, our machines, and our endless hunger for understanding made us a danger to the galaxy itself. And so, the verdict was spoken. Exile. Every human world, every ship, every colony, stripped of starlight. In the great council chamber, Jake Morrison stood in silence. He was a soldier once, one of the first to defend Earth during the early contact wars. But now he stood not as a warrior, but as a symbol of defeat. Around him floated representatives of 100 alien civilizations, their bodies shimmering like fragments of a dream. They spoke in layered tones, music and code intertwined, and each syllable sealed humanity's fate. Humanity is hereby confined to its home system, the voice of the Serra Imperium declared, cold and absolute. Your fleets will be dismantled. Your wormholes sealed. You will live, but never again among the stars. Jake didn't argue. He only whispered the words that would one day echo through every generation. You can take the stars from us. But you can't take the dream of them. When the last of the council ships departed, Earth fell silent. Satellites burned as the blockade took form, a shimmering wall of energy surrounding the Sol system. From Mars to Neptune, lights went dark. Ships returning home were destroyed at the edge of the line. Billions watched as their skies dimmed, not from nightfall, but from separation. And in that moment, something ancient stirred inside humanity. Not anger. Not fear. Memory. Because deep within every human, buried beneath evolution and history, there was a whisper. The same one that pushed our ancestors across oceans, deserts, and now across the stars. We will return. The decades that followed were slow, suffocating, and quiet. Earth became a prison, but also, unknowingly, a forge. Governments collapsed, reformed, and then united under a simple name, the Directorate of Earth. What began as survival turned into purpose. Every city became a laboratory. Every scientist became a philosopher. Humanity's new war wasn't fought with weapons, but with time, patience, and thought. They studied the blockade not with anger, but curiosity. They built machines that whispered through gravity. They learned how to bend light without breaking it. And they waited. Among them was Dr. Helen Carter, a physicist who believed that the Council's exile wasn't punishment, but a test. She wrote in her journals. If they feared us for what we were, imagine what they'll become when they see what we've become in isolation. Her work would lay the foundation for Project Horizon, a silent initiative buried beneath the Antarctic ice. It was there that the Directorate began to shape something new, not a weapon, but a question. A question wrapped in technology so advanced it could not be detected. What if a civilization could leave without moving? What if humanity could reach beyond the blockade, not through space, but through reality itself? But while scientists worked in secret, poets and philosophers began to speak of something else, of identity. For the first time in centuries, humanity wasn't expanding. We were looking inward. People began to ask. If we can no longer see the stars, do they still exist for us? If the universe has forgotten us, what meaning does existence hold? And yet, across those dark years, music filled the night. Children drew constellations they had never seen. Old veterans like Jake Morrison told stories about the colors of alien suns, stories that no one could verify, yet everyone believed. Because belief, it turned out, was something no empire could blockade. In time, the Serra Empire, the architects of our exile, forgot about us. To them, humanity became a myth, a warning told to young species about the danger of ambition. They said Earth had gone quiet. That the humans had turned on themselves, that we had perished in our isolation. But beneath that silence, in the frozen tunnels of Antarctica, something impossible was being born. Dr. Carter's theories were proving real. Matter began to bend. Space began to hum. And humanity, for the first time in 500 years, had a glimpse of light. A signal. Not from the Council. Not from aliens. From ourselves, reflected back from the edge of the void. It was proof that the universe could still hear us. If you're still watching, ask yourself, what would we do if this happened to us today? If the universe exiled us, stripped us of everything we've built, would we still look up? Would we still dream of the stars? Because the story of humanity has never been about power. It's about memory, the refusal to forget who we are, even when the universe tries to erase us. And as the light from Project Horizon began to flicker through the Antarctic ice, Jake Morrison, now an old man, looked up at the sky one last time and whispered. We never stopped reaching. He didn't know it then, but the spark that would reignite humanity's journey had already begun. The Council believed they had buried us. But in truth, they had only given us time to evolve. 5 centuries after exile, Earth slept beneath the quiet hum of its own evolution. The stars were still hidden behind the blockade, an endless shell of silence, but below the surface, humanity was stirring once again. In the frozen depths of Antarctica, Project Horizon had grown from theory into faith. What began as an experiment to bend space had become something far greater, a redefinition of existence itself. Dr. Helen Carter, now old and gray, watched her machines whisper to one another through gravity and time. Each vibration carried meaning, not in words, but in possibility. The universe, it turned out, was not closed to humanity. It was listening. Reality, she once wrote, isn't a boundary. It's a question waiting to be answered. In those underground halls, light didn't behave the way it should. It shimmered like liquid, bending around thought, responding to intent. The scientists called it the resonance field, but the poets of New Earth gave it another name. The mirror of dawn. Through it, humanity could see echoes, faint reflections of worlds that had once belonged to us. Lost colonies. Abandoned cities orbiting foreign suns. And beyond them, the cold geometry of the Sarah Empire, still ruling, still expanding, never suspecting that the ghosts of humanity were watching them from the dark. By the year 3071, the Directorate of Earth had evolved into something new, a civilization of quiet brilliance. There were no borders now, no nations, no wars. Only one goal, to return, not in vengeance, but in understanding. Every generation added to the work of the last. Children grew up learning that science was memory, that knowledge was a form of survival. They didn't dream of conquering the stars anymore. They dreamed of earning them back. And then, one night, the impossible happened. In the frozen control chamber of Project Horizon, the resonance field shifted. For the first time, it didn't reflect. It opened. Dar. Carter's successor, Admiral Elias Rowan, was the first to step forward. He wasn't a soldier in the traditional sense, more an explorer, raised in the long shadow of exile. As he reached out, the air before him rippled like a curtain of light, and through it, he saw something humanity hadn't seen in half a millennium. Stars. But these stars were different. They shimmered with a stillness that made the heart ache, as if they were holding their breath. The blockade had not fallen. It was still there, pulsing with alien energy. Yet through the mirror of dawn, humanity had found a way around it. Not through wormholes, not through ships, but through quantum reflection. In essence, humanity had discovered how to exist in parallel, to send echoes of themselves beyond the barrier, shadows of thought that could touch other worlds. And with that, the era of silence ended. At first, the galaxy noticed only whispers. Sensors flickered. Machines reported impossible readings. The Sarah Empire's outer fleets detected unknown transmissions in human languages long considered extinct. Entire command stations laughed it off, until a derelict satellite orbiting Proxima Centauri suddenly reactivated after 500,000 years. It broadcast one message, simple and clear. We remember. The Sarah called it a ghost signal. But the Harari, a neutral and ancient species of observers, recognized it for what it was. They said quietly among themselves. The exiled have begun to dream again. Back on Earth, the Directorate faced a choice. Now that they could reach beyond the blockade, should they reveal themselves to the galaxy? Or remain in the shadows, studying, preparing, learning from afar? The answer came not from scientists, nor politicians, but from the children, those raised under a sky that never changed. They painted murals of galaxies, wrote stories of homecoming, and sang songs in frequencies the resonance field could interpret. And somehow, those songs reached beyond the blockade. Entire alien observatories began to detect patterns of sound, haunting, human, and beautiful. Without realizing it, humanity had invented psychological warfare through art. They reminded the galaxy of something it had long buried, emotion. The Sarah Empire began to fracture from within. Their people, long conditioned to obedience, started to question why their rulers had exiled such a species. Why fear those who sang to the stars? If you're still watching, think about this. What if humanity's greatest weapon was never technology, but memory, the ability to feel across time? What if the universe isn't divided by space, but by empathy? And we're the only species stubborn enough to bridge it? Because the truth is, the moment humanity looked inward, we became something else. Not conquerors. Not victims. But mirrors, reflecting the universe back to itself. A decade later, the first Echo fleet was born, not ships in the physical sense, but constructs of light and quantum resonance. Each one piloted by a consciousness uploaded into the mirror field, capable of traversing the blockade undetected. Among the first volunteers was Admiral Rowan, who understood what it meant to become a shadow for the sake of the species. He left behind his body, his name, his past, and stepped into the void as the first human to touch the stars again. Through him, humanity returned to the galaxy, unseen, unheard, but everywhere. In time, alien fleets began vanishing at the edges of Empire space. Not destroyed, just gone. Entire sectors went dark, not from war, but from silence. And across the galaxy, a new myth began to spread. Of a ghost civilization. Of humanity reborn not in flesh, but in light. The Sarah Empire tried to deny it. But deep in their archives, sealed behind layers of denial, was the recording of a single human signal. A voice, calm, old, and familiar. Jake Morrison's voice. This is Earth. We are not your enemy. We are your reflection. Look closer, and you will see yourselves. The Empire never responded. But across their colonies, people began to dream of oceans, skies, and a blue world they had never seen. Humanity's exile had ended, not with vengeance, but with awakening. As the mirror of dawn pulsed one last time beneath the Antarctic ice, Dr. Carter's ashes were released into the field. Her consciousness, encoded in light, joined the fleet she had made possible. Her final message, preserved in the Directorate's archives, simply read. They took the stars from us. So we became the stars. If you're still here, remember this. Every civilization that survives long enough eventually faces exile, from others, or from itself. What defines us isn't whether we fall, but whether we listen to the silence that follows. Because sometimes, silence isn't punishment. It's preparation. And for humanity, the silence of exile had forged something unstoppable. The next part of this story, Part 3, The Architects of Oblivion, would reveal what waited beyond the galaxy. Something older than the Council. Something that feared humanity's return. There are moments in history when silence itself feels alive. Moments when the universe seems to hold its breath, not out of peace, but out of anticipation. When the mirror of dawn opened and humanity's echoes spread across the stars, the galaxy awakened to something it hadn't felt in millennia. Wonder. Fear. And then, something else. A question. Because if the humans could return from exile, without ships, without armies, without permission, what else might be waiting in the dark? At first, the Sera Empire thought it was hallucination. Entire fleets reported strange distortions, stars that flickered out for hours and then returned, subtly rearranged. Planets lost moons that later reappeared, perfectly aligned. But the Empire's arrogance blinded them. They believed it was human interference, a new form of psychological warfare. They were wrong. Even the Harari, the neutral observers of galactic balance, began to whisper of a far older force. They called them the architects, beings who predated the Council, who once shaped galaxies like clay, and who vanished when the universe was still young. Now, something had stirred them awake. The first encounter happened in a sector no longer charted, a void where even light feared to travel. A Sera scout vessel, T-Val-13, detected an artificial structure roughly the size of a moon, rotating in perfect silence. Its surface emitted no radiation, no signals, no sound. When the crew attempted to scan it, their instruments began to fail, not physically, but conceptually. Readings contradicted themselves. Time refused to behave. Reality became inconsistent. And then, one by one, the crew disappeared. Not killed. Not transported. Simply erased, as if they had never existed. The last transmission from T-Val-13 was a single phrase, spoken in a voice not their own. The architects have noticed the noise. Back on Earth, the Directorate intercepted fragments of that transmission through the resonance field. Dar. Helen Carter's successors, now known as the Custodians of Horizon, analyzed the signal and discovered something terrifying. Hidden in the waveform was a pattern identical to human DNA. That discovery changed everything. The architects weren't just watching. They were connected, to us. Perhaps even responsible for us. For the first time in thousands of years, humanity felt something they hadn't since exile. Not anger. Not pride. But dread. Admiral Rowan, still leading the Echo fleet from within the mirror field, saw the truth first. The architects weren't coming for the Sera Empire, they were coming for the source of the disturbance. For humanity. Through the resonance channels, Rowan sent a message to the Directorate. We've reached the edge of known space. Beyond this point, stars don't behave like stars. There's something building structures out of gravity itself. The data that followed defied comprehension, black holes arranged in deliberate geometries, galaxies twisted into spirals of encoded meaning. It wasn't random. It was communication. The architects were writing with the universe. But what were they saying? That answer came not from a scientist, but from an artist, a blind composer named Lyra Voss, whose music had once been used to stabilize the resonance field. When she heard the architect pattern, she recognized its rhythm. It's not a message, she said quietly. It's a memory. The architects weren't calling to us. They were remembering us, as if humanity had existed before, long before history began. That revelation shattered every assumption. If the architects had shaped the early universe, and if human DNA carried echoes of their design, then humanity wasn't an accident of biology. We were a fragment of the architects themselves. If you're still watching, think about what that means. If a part of you was created by something that built galaxies, does that make you divine, or just another experiment? Would you still call yourself human, knowing you were born from something older than creation itself? Sometimes the scariest truth isn't that we're alone in the universe. It's that we might be a reflection of its mind. The Sera Empire's fleets fell one by one. Not in battle, but in silence. Ships vanished without explosions, without wreckage, without resistance. The architects were not fighting. They were editing. Every trace of the Empire's arrogance, every world that had enslaved another, was being rewritten, reality itself correcting the imbalance. And in the center of it all, humanity stood untouched. The Council demanded to know why. The Harari simply answered. Because they remember their own. The Directorate of Earth gathered for the first true Council of Humanity in over 500,000 years. Representatives from every surviving outpost, from the Martian vault cities to the floating colonies above Venus, joined through the resonance field. Admiral Rowan's voice echoed from the Mirror of Dawn. The architects are rewriting existence. We are next, unless we choose what we become. Dr. Voss, the composer, offered an alternative. She believed the architects weren't destroying life, they were testing it. Seeking consciousness that could see as they once did. So humanity made a decision unlike any before. Not to resist. Not to surrender. But to listen. For the first time since exile, the entirety of humanity entered synchronization, mind, memory, and emotion aligned through the resonance field. Billions of voices merged into one frequency. The Mirror of Dawn became a living entity, a mind made of humanity itself. And as that unified consciousness reached outward, the architects answered. What followed was not speech, nor vision, but recognition. An understanding that could not be expressed in words. The architects had not exiled humanity. They had hidden us, to protect us until we were ready to remember what we were. We were their successors. The inheritors of the universe's forgotten purpose. In that instant, the stars blazed back into view. The blockade disintegrated. The galaxy shuddered as if waking from a dream. Every world that had once erased humanity's name now whispered it again, not as a threat, but as a prayer. The children of dawn have returned. The architects vanished once more, leaving behind their message, carved into the structure of spacetime itself. We built you to finish what we could not, to understand why creation must continue. If you're still here, think about that. Maybe evolution isn't about survival or progress. Maybe it's about memory, passed down not just through genes, but through existence itself. Maybe every civilization that looks to the stars is really just trying to remember what it once was. Humanity began as exiles. But in the end, we became something else. The continuation of the architect's dream. And somewhere, in the quiet between galaxies, that dream still unfolds, one consciousness at a time.